What is up, heathen? I appreciate you joining me for the very last installment of my conversation with Matt here. This particular part of it doesn't end so well for me. I think that Matt has a lot of good points here, and it has really, made me want to become, I guess, more solid in my thoughts about the mythical Jesus and everything. Really has gotten me to look outside of what I've already read and look into more of the people that he's talking about. I'm still currently kind of going through that, so that's been one big thing that I've learned. What I'm gonna do is do kind of a summary video of what this particular conversation has really taught me and how I've become better for it. So, if you would like to see that, leave a comment down below. Let me know. Also, let me know what your thoughts are as we have this conversation. I'll see you after the interview. Okay. Well, let's see. Is there any other topic that you wanted to kind of broach with me as far as, I guess, my video went? Because I know this is kind of what sparked us, getting on Skype here.
Yeah. Well, I think. Sorry, my earpiece is falling out. We got a lot on Paul, and Paul is definitely not an area of expertise of mine. I'm more into the Gospels and Mark, so I would say I'm definitely out of my area of expertise when it comes to Paul. But I think that's why I brought up the issue of consensus. I think is important. But yeah, we don't want to make arguments from authority, because when we make arguments from authority, we're not doing the due diligence and understanding that authority. But it does say something as lay people, and when it's not just a consensus, but it's such an overwhelming consensus that now we have to understand why they come to that conclusion. Why do most scholars and every academic scholar today hold to the position, for example, I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but just why do they hold to the position that Paul meant James, the actual brother of Jesus, as a title? Why do they hold that? And we have to be willing to do our homework and really understand that, not just assume, well, they just mean it because they mean it. No, there's reasons they mean it. And I think that's the important thing is, can we make a good argument as to why they believe it in order to tear it down? So go ahead.
I think that there's good reason to doubt the consensus on this issue.
And there very well may be. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm saying, have we done our homework to understand why?
No. You are telling me that I shouldn't doubt the overwhelming consensus from, albeit Christian scholars that are contractually obligated, for the most part, to assume that Jesus Christ existed. I mean, there's
not all. I'm not just talking about Christian scholars.
No. I know you're not just talking about Christian scholars here, but I'm saying that you're saying that there's this overwhelming consensus when it's not so overwhelming when you take into the fact that a lot of them are Christians, a lot of them are biased in it.
Hold on. I'm just talking about, for example, this one passage in Galatians about James. Nothing to do with the historical Jesus. Nothing at all. You could believe Paul meant generic Christian and still hold to the historical Jesus.
Okay.
People debate Paul's theology all the time. But this particular passage, which mythicism relies so heavily upon, is not one of the highly debated
No, mythicism
passages.
doesn't rely heavily on this one passage. That's ridiculous.
It
For you to boil
like,
it down to like that is a straw man.
I'm saying it seems that this is an argument. When you talk about Paul believing a celestial Jesus, it seems like this is an argument we have to get past. Which I personally don't think it's necessary. I think Paul could believe in an earthly Jesus, and there still could be a sect of Jews that believe in a celestial Jesus. I honestly think it's a red herring to mythicists to focus so much on Paul. I think it's a waste of energy, because people who aren't invested in the historical Jesus question would still say this passage should be interpreted this way. That was my point, is it's not just contractually obligated scholars. It's people who study Greek, experts in Koine Greek, experts in first century dialogue. They're the ones who say this. It's like when I talk to an apologist and they say, well, Paul wrote 14 letters, not 7. Well, and the only people who said are secular scholars. No, people who aren't even New Testament scholars, who are linguistic experts, examine these texts and say they're not written by the same person, who have no say in the matter. They're just experts and they examine the text independently. And when you have a consensus among people who independently, who don't care about your claim one way or the other, that should at least mean something. And again, it should mean that I need to do my homework.
Do you know Mike Licona?
I do know Mike Licona, yes. I talked to Mike Licona. So
okay. Do you recall what happened to him when he cast doubt upon the idea that a bunch of Jews rose from the dead after Jesus died and walked the streets of Jerusalem?
What's that going to do with?
Well, it's an example. It's one example. He lost his job for doubting that small principle of Christianity.
Where did he teach at?
Well, I mean, I don't have that memorized. I can't remember where he was teaching.
Liberty University, with Gary Happel.
Okay.
Yes, ultra-conservative university.
Yes, but it's still no, hold on. Let me finish, please. The fact remains that if you dissent from this quote-unquote overwhelming consensus about stuff, then you suffer major consequences like losing your job or not being able to get a job in the field that you trained for like 20 years for. My point here is that I doubt it when people start examining Jesus because he's so worked into so many political and financial and economic things that there is a bias towards it saying that Jesus existed or saying that James was somehow the brother of the Lord, even though that doesn't explain a lot of Catholic and other kind of history. Like, you have to understand, me being a skeptic, I doubt this consensus because of how snowflakey they are about it.
But you're not. I don't think we're using the skeptical method here. Take, for example, you claim people who have disagreements with consensus can lose their jobs. You pick Mike Licona, who teaches at Liberty University, who got in trouble because he doubted a university which teaches gospel liberalism. Dale Martin just released a peer-reviewed paper where he talks about Jesus leading an armed rebellion, almost a zealot rebellion, into Jerusalem the night he was arrested.
Okay,
that would be some pretty heretical thing to teach. I've talked to scholars who think when the disciples saw the resurrection, it was a guy on a beach, and he looked like Jesus. That was the view of the resurrection.
Okay, listen,
go ahead.
Matt, I'm not saying that every single scholar out there will be persecuted or whatnot because they dissent. What I'm saying is that there's good evidence to suggest that if a scholar dissents on one certain thing, it doesn't even have to be the historicity of Jesus. If they dissent on something, there's a good possibility that they could be blacklisted in the community or they could be fired from their job. Not to mention the number of universities out there, both secular and Christian, that would require you to, in their theological schools, require you to sign a statement of faith. Like, there's a good number of them.
Does Chapel Hill? Does Yale? Does Harvard?
No, we're not going to go through. I don't have to list every single one of them.
It's a minority because it's a minority. It is not.
No.
It's a minority. I assure you.
No, 33% would respond that yes, you have to have a statement of faith, and then there's another 24% that refuse to answer that question.
And I'm telling you to do your homework. But even then,
I've done my homework. Don't tell me to do my homework.
Let's disqualify universities that make you sign a statement of faith. Then what's our consensus at? Oh, it's still at the same. The problem with making this opposite argument of authority that, well, we can't trust the authority because of X, it's just we have so much evidence of scholars saying things that are against the consensus to say, or they just do it because, they have to do it. It's, to me, an understanding argument scholars give that fly in the face of consensus, like Paul being an adoptionist. That's a pretty heretical thing to say. And I know a lot of scholars who hold to the view Paul's an adoptionist. I know a lot of scholars who hold to the view that Jesus thought the end times would happen in his lifetime, that there would be no second coming. And you're telling me that those are okay to have, but certain other views aren't. I just think.
No, I'm not saying that. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the consequent of dissent is real. Like there's a real consequence. What?
That is dissent. So with these, what Dale Morgan.
I understand that it is dissent. I'm not saying that every single scholar out there that dissents is going to suffer repercussions. I'm just saying the possibility of repercussions is there just for doing their own academic work. They have to take that in consideration. Like I'm sure that those scholars, before doing their dissenting opinion, had to make the decision. Like, well, if I put this out there, it's pretty dissenting from what most people say. So, am I prepared? I mean, I'm.
Yeah, I would say that with some scholars, and obviously you have some with tenure like Berman and Del Martin or McGrath. You can pretty much
I don't see how you can crap on the idea that the possibility of it isn't real.
But again, just because it's possible doesn't mean it's probable. You're saying that so much scholars, for enough to make it not a consensus, hold Jesus didn't exist, but are afraid to speak out about it, or what? If we follow this logic through and this hypothesis through, what's the end point? What's the conclusion here?
Well, that there are scholars out there that do hold to the consensus, but only because if they were to deviate from it, they could suffer consequences of it. I'm not saying that's every single scholar out there.
Evidence.
Huh?
We have evidence for it.
Well, there's plenty of evidence out there. Like, for instance, Mike Licona. I mean, I'm sure you read David Fitzgerald's new book, right?
But do we have, yes, I have David Fitzgerald, but I'm saying, do we have evidence that there are scholars out there who think Jesus was a myth, but have not publicly said so?
Well, yes, there have been people that have mentioned
Name
that
one.
Huh?
Name one.
No, I can't. My ability to name one doesn't negate the fact that they're out there.
But the point is, again, we don't have evidence. We just have hearsay. We have anecdotes.
Okay.
Is that what we're calling an anecdote? That's my issue with that argument is no one can name any. And that doesn't mean they're not out there, but it has no place in an argument because it's an anecdote. Just like saying there's evolutionary biologists out there who are actually creationists, but they don't want to say anything. That sounds like an absurd claim, and I can't prove it, but I'm just going to assert. That's why I don't like that argument. There's better arguments out there. We could, you can do better arguments than an anecdote that there's these unnamed scholars hiding.
No, but you choose to shit on my other arguments, and so I mean,
by your other arguments doesn't mean I shit on them. I don't think they're horrible arguments. Just I'm unconvinced that they're more probable than an argument that seems to require less, steps to get to the result. I'm not saying they're horrible arguments. I'm unconvinced by them. I think it's more probable than not that this meant this, not this. I don't think every argument you would give is a horrible argument, or like that. I just think so much your James argument is a horrible argument. I just remain unconvinced, and this is the reason I remain unconvinced. This is the reason I gave you. Does that make sense?
It does. And I mean, I appreciate you joining me today to talk about this. I know that, like I said, I still get heated at times, lose myself a little bit.
Don't apologize for getting heated. I do have a habit of interrupting people. I do that often because if I feel like I know where you're going, it's like that's not good.
Yeah.
But I have a ton of respect for Robert Price and Richard Carrier and David Fitzgerald, and I text all the time. And he knows I highly disagree with this very unique reading of the Gospel of Mark. it's an allegory, but that's a whole other discussion. But I was a mythicist for a while. Then I started actually talking to scholars and saying, what is the reason you have this argument? Yes, there may be scholars, and I would believe there may be scholars that are mythicists that don't say so. I wouldn't be surprised if Hector Avalos was a mythicist. Wouldn't surprise me. But again, in using arguments and trying to make a point, I don't like anecdotes, and I think that's an anecdotal argument. So that's why I say that's a poor argument, I think. And I wish Fitzgerald would stop using it because you can't prove it. But I do think it's probable. But then again, I also listen to the arguments. I've talked to scholars and archaeologists from around the planet saying, what is your reason? What's the evidence for this? And I can't go into that in the weight of evidence. And I found there's a reason there's an overwhelming consensus. There's a reason Robert Price is the only academic scholar today who holds a mythicist position, at least publicly.
Well, I think it's a bit disingenuous that you only qualify the academic scholars.
Well, who else should qualify? Lay people? Students? There's a reason I would say...
No, Richard Carrier's not an academic scholar, but he's still a fucking historian.
He's a historian, but he's not an academic New Testament scholar.
But that doesn't disregard his PhD in fucking history.
What was his
It's a shitty lowball hit.
No, we can even throw Carrier in there if you want. And there's two scholars. I'm using the term I'm using the term academic scholar to keep it within the field of expertise. Carrier is a historian in Roman history, and he wrote a dissertation about morality. But again, Carrier goes against the consensus, and he's not an academic scholar. It doesn't mean his arguments are poor, but again, we're trying to talk about people who are scholars. And
so you're pigeonholing the entire the whole thing onto people that are definitely going to agree with your position on it.
No,
echo chamber much?
Experts. I'm not. I just explained. I have a 3-hour interview with Richard Carrier and Robert Price, Raphael Tasker, who will be a scholar soon and who is a mythicist. He is soon to be completing his PhD, and he will be an academic scholar who is a mythicist. And I have a ton of respect for Lataster as well. So it's not like you can't make the accusation that we're in an echo chamber. Trust me, I've done a lot of talks with people from many different. I went out of my way to try to find a mythicist in the academic field. The closest I got was Hector Avalos and Heidi Wint, who both are close to being agnostic. Heidi Wint is not quite an agnostic, but she's close. Avalos would say he is an agnostic, but doesn't think the celestial Jesus view lends credence to first century Christianity. So again, I try to find mythicists out there, and when I don't categorize Price as an academic scholar, I think I'm just doing it to be fair to the scholarly community, I guess, and to other experts in the area. That's not to say Carrier doesn't know anything. He does. He knows a lot about the ascension of Isaiah. If he wanted to and really worked at it, he could probably write a good paper on the ascension of Isaiah and all the stuff he knows about.
He wrote a good paper. He wrote a good book on the historicity of Jesus.
Yeah, he did write a very long book on the historicity of Jesus.
No. A good book. He wrote a good book. I know you disagree with that, but it's a good book.
Let me ask you this. How many experts in messianic expectations and second temple Judaism have you read about or spoken to?
Okay. I don't see how that has any kind of bearing here.
Yeah, because we're trying to figure out who Jesus' first followers thought he was. And so we should say, okay, well, what were some messianic expectations of Jews during that time period? How many experts have you read on Pauline syntax?
Okay, I haven't read any.
So you say I'm in an echo chamber, but I go outside of my way to read these nuances. These people who spend their life studying something like just the syntax of Paul and understanding just that. I think that would be, in order to make a fair judgment on all these little nuances, like what were the different Jewish messianic expectations in the Second Temple? What were the different sects of Jews? How much does Zoroastrianism affect Judaism during the first century? Things like that. That's where collecting this massive information, that's why I find it improbable that there was a sect of Jews who accepted a celestial Messiah, is because things like that. So, and I would encourage anybody to do that. We can't just read one book on the historicity of Jesus or Bart Ehrman. There's other scholars out there.
No, I didn't just read one book. You act like I'm in an echo chamber. I looked at the historical arguments for Christ. I believe that Christ was a historical figure. And then I started looking into it. And it just doesn't make sense to me. So I get that we are on opposite sides of this issue, and I don't think that we're going to be able to convince either one of us. And I wasn't trying to convince you here. I was just trying. I just wanted to understand how you came to think that Jesus was a historical person. And yeah, I haven't read a book specifically on how Paul talked or whatnot. But in the same token, I haven't only just read Richard Carrier, on the Historicity of Jesus. I've read I've read gospel fictions. I've read John Dominic Crossan's Power of Parable. I've read a lot of different books that explain like New Testament stuff.
But I guess I don't approach it as the basic question of did Jesus exist. I approach it as if Jesus didn't exist, what is the other option of the origins of Christianity? I approach it as what's the most plausible solution to the origins of Christianity. And if Jesus didn't exist, then what were the other messianic expectations of Jews in the Second Temple? And if we go by the hypothesis, well, Jesus was a celestial figure, what evidence do we have that there were any Jews that held Jesus being a celestial deity, or they were expecting a celestial Messiah? Things like that. I just don't take the fact what was the evidence Jesus existed, because it's the first century. Evidence for anybody existing is pretty rare to begin with, and I don't think that's the appropriate way. I look at what would history be like if one hypothesis was more plausible than the other. And when I hear about a celestial Jesus, what sect of Jews had a celestial expectation of a Messiah is what I go to. We have evidence for none of them anywhere.
I think that Paul thought that Jesus actually walked the earth, but he doesn't give us any kind of indication that he actually did, because he received it through revelation. I think that other Christians and other sects believed that he walked the earth, but they only got their information from scriptures and via revelation. So it's not like you're asking this one question of what Jews were expecting a celestial Jesus, and I'm saying that they thought that he walked on earth, but they only got their information from scriptures and revelation.
Okay, so maybe you don't hold that Jesus was purely celestial to the first followers.
No, I don't think that he was purely celestial. I think that they thought he actually walked the earth, but the only way that they knew anything about him was by interpreting scriptures.
Then the question we have is the origin. How did it begin? What's the closest we can get to determining how this movement started? What's the more probable explanation that these characters like Cephas, Peter, met Jesus, Jesus died? Again, what's the most plausible with what we have? Unfortunately, history doesn't let us be 100% certain with anything, so we have to just go by what the information we have. And I think with the information we have, that fact that we have external sources of this guy Jesus being crucified by the Romans, Jews were expecting...
We don't have external sources of Jesus being crucified.
Well, I mean external sources. We have more than one source. I guess Paul and Mark would be considered two sources. I would say.
Yeah, but
And we have,
those were all in the Bible, though. I thought you meant
I'm
like
saying
external.
historical documents. We
I don't
can't
think
look
they're
at the Bible. We can't look at the Bible as one book. Mark was written independently from Paul's letters. John was written independently from the Synoptics. You have to understand. Yes, we can't say. I'm using the terms sources as independently written from one another, unaware of the other's existence. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I'm still saying that the Bible and the
I
individual
don't care
books
about the
can.
Bible,
Hold on, God damn it!
but
I'm
I'm
saying
making
that the Bible and individual books contained in it are a collection of the claim, and having outside sources other than that to verify it would be convincing to me.
yeah,
And
but that's not how history works. You're looking at the Bible as a Christian would look at the Bible as one work. History looks at
well,
these
no,
documents.
I'm not
You
looking at it as one work. I said that there are individual books inside of it. I just think that it's a it's a mixtape, basically.
yes, and if a mixtape, say for example, we have a mixtape, and one thing says this and the other says this. They disagree theologically and Christologically, but they agree on an aspect that the historical method seems more probable than not. This probably occurred because it meets this criteria that works more often than not in other aspects of history, using methods that we can test. So dealing with probability,
Well,
that's probably like Jesus being crucified. Paul mentions it. Mark mentions it. People mention that there were Christians within the first 50 years that believed Jesus was crucified. So it was a common belief. And we also understand that Jews at the time thought being crucified was an embarrassment and a curse. So it meets these different criteria. Does that mean Jesus was 100% crucified? No, but it means probably he was
no.
crucified. Does that make sense?
Well, no. I think that it means they thought he was crucified, and that crucifixion was a popular kill method at the time, or death device.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that because I think, yeah, the earliest we can get is what they thought of him, but I think we can trace it back fairly early, just like the baptism from John the Baptist. I think things like that, which meet the criteria of dissimilarity, the criteria of embarrassment, explanatory scope, these historical methods, that doesn't mean they're accurate, but it means they're right more often than they're wrong. And I think, yeah, the most we can get is what people believed about Jesus. And if people believed this happened, we have to say we can't know for certain, but we know people had a strong belief that Jesus was crucified, people were crucified, so historically he probably was crucified. Does that make sense?
I get that you're making a lot of assumptions.
I'm not making assumptions. I'm saying probability-wise, if you are weighing the option of did Jesus get crucified, assuming we get to the historical Jesus, yes, we would say more probable than not with the sources we have. It would be reasonable to say he probably was, because there's no sources of any other way he died. There's no sources of, it just meets all the criteria of history that works in other areas. That's right more often than it's wrong.
Well, I just don't find it convincing that just because crucifixion existed and this bloke named Jesus supposedly existed, that means that he definitely was nailed to a cross. Like, I don't know. That just seems unconvincing.
There's more to it. Okay, there's a lot more to it than that. I just think, again, if Jesus existed, and like I said, let's look at the reason he was crucified. He was crucified for being king of the Jews. That in and of itself shows some historical precedence there, as opposed to how the Gospels have him crucified. The Gospels have him crucified for committing blasphemy, but not for being king of the Jews. Being king of the Jews wasn't blasphemous. Being king of the Jews was a Roman problem. That was a crime against Rome. And the Gospels go out of their way to make it look like Rome's innocent in the crucifixion of Jesus. But you have a tradition so strong in the story that he was crucified for this reason, that there's a reason that's in there. It doesn't flow with the story the Gospels are portraying. It almost goes against the grain, but it's still in there. Same way with the baptism of John the Baptist. It goes against being baptized was a ritual purity ceremony. Jesus, if he was perfect, he shouldn't have been baptized. He was ritually pure already. So the fact that that's in there shows there's a reason it's in there, and it almost goes against the story they're trying to tell. But again, if it's so ingrained in these oral traditions, you have to ask yourself as a historian, why is this in there? Does it meet predictability power? Does it meet the criteria of dissimilarity, meaning it goes against what the story at the time is trying to tell? Does it meet the criteria of embarrassment? Is there more than one source for this? And it meets, the crucifixion meets all that criteria, not just one. I think it meets all of it. And that's not to say it's 100% accurate. That just means it's more probable than not.
Okay. I do want to end on asking this question real quick, and it might be a dick thing of me to ask, but okay, so prior to germ theory, what did all the experts say?
Well, prior to germ theory, they probably, I don't know what the consensus was, what demons caused sicknesses.
I'm not sure what the consensus was, but it definitely wasn't that germs, caused infections and stuff.
That's why, but I'm not saying, and I never once said the consensus is correct. I'm saying
no, but you're appealing to the consensus in order to say
once.
that it's more probable.
I haven't once appealed to the consensus that it's more probable. I appeal to the consensus to say, have we done our homework and understood why the consensus is what it is? I also have appealed to the historical method and said, this seems more probable than not because of these arguments they get. And we don't have time to go into every little argument, but I'm not saying the consensus is correct. I'm saying, have we done our homework to understand why the consensus is what it is? And can we refute arguments given by the consensus? And I don't think a lot of people aren't even there to understand. We keep going back to the James, brother of the Lord. Why, when I bring up the consensus, why do people who aren't historical Jesus scholars also agree upon the interpretation of that passage? That's the question, is why do they? Not whether they're right or wrong, but to understand the reason independent experts who don't care about Jesus' existence also agree on it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying, what's the reason? What's the argument they give? Understand those arguments, then refute those arguments. Because we're not refuting those arguments. We're just making up a new argument, which I don't think is that convincing to me. That makes sense?
Yeah. Well, again, Matt, I appreciate you joining me today. You've really given me a lot to think about, and hopefully that'll just strengthen my argument later on. So, again, I really do appreciate you joining me for this very extended interview.
Sorry, I kept interrupting you. I do that a lot. You're not the only person who say I do that. I need to work on that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was interrupting you too. So, but anyways,
I enjoyed it, and I'm not, like I said, I'm in a very interesting position because I'll go to a synagogue. I went to a synagogue last week, I think, and everywhere I go, I feel like if I talk to atheists, I'm in the minority. If I talk to Christians, I'm in the minority.
As far as like the Jesus question goes, or just in general?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just in general, or what I talk about, things like that. But I think a lot of atheists hold to the mysticist position, but aren't willing to go that extra step. Like I said, it sounds like it's giving me authority, but I'm honestly sincere. What is the argument someone would give to say this? What's the positive argument a independent linguistic expert would say this is what Paul meant? Don't care about the Jesus question. Irrelevant. Look up an independent linguistic expert and understand their argument, and then refute that argument. before you go make another argument no one's even making. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I understand that. It's just that you seem to just toss aside the arguments against theirs.
No, I'm not tossing it aside. I just am unconvinced because it lacks, like I said, I personally feel, and you're going to disagree, we don't have to go back into it. I think it lacks predictability, power, explanatory scope, which are two major components of historical research. But you would disagree. We don't need to go back into that.
Okay. Well, let me try to end on this particular question. Sure. Is there anything in history that could have happened with a mythical Christ or with a historical Christ that couldn't happen with a mythical Christ? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I think. Let me think about answer your question correctly. Could something happen that only historical Jesus could do that a mythical Jesus could not do?
Right.
What do you mean by mythical Jesus? Celestial
Jesus? Well,
Jesus?
just that he was. Well, no, just that he was a myth, regardless of whether or not the original, like the first century Christians thought he walked the earth, or if he actually did walk the earth. Like, what is one thing in history that would have needed to would have happened, but only because he actually walked the earth?
If he was born, I mean, a lot of stuff. If he actually happened, but we don't know that stuff, and that's why. Yeah, he would have never been born. But again, that's why the question to me isn't whether Jesus existed. It's what's the more probable solution to the origins of Christianity? Is it he didn't exist or he did exist?
Well, okay, well then that would be, well, I mean, I think the answer to my question would be that you think that Christianity wouldn't exist if Jesus hadn't have been born.
I think, given the evidence we have currently, it would be highly improbable. Doesn't mean it can't happen. I deal with probability, not in an absolute yes, it could or no, it couldn't. I think with more evidence, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that when I talk like that, I don't mean like 100% definite thing. I mean more probable or less probable kind of thing. I just, in a colloquial sense, that's how I
think. I think there's definitely just the issue with that is why would, again, I think back to Jesus being the Christology problem is what some scholars call it for mythicism is how did Christianity begin? We would expect a high Christology from the beginning. We don't find that. We find a low Christology and it goes up. Just the evidence we have, I don't see any sect of Judaism that would make this up. What would be the motivation? That's not saying they won't. We just need evidence for it. We lack the evidence to assume a sect of Judaism existed which would make up a mythical figure, but then we lack the motivation. Now, at some point we may find that. But so to answer your question, would something historically exist that couldn't exist mythologically? Well, obviously, if Jesus was born, it couldn't happen mythically, but I think more probable than not, the first followers thought he existed. And if they thought he existed, more likely than not, he probably did.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it, Matt. And I guess maybe I hope that we can have this conversation again later.
Yeah, so do I. It was fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Matt. And I'll see you later, and I'm glad we're still friends.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll see you later. Well, there you have it. That was the very last bit of the Matt Kovacs discussion interview kind of deal. I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you will, please leave a comment down below for what you thought. Matt kind of got me there talking about, well, what have I read outside of, the Richard Carrier and other people that are mythicists. And I still maintain that he's focusing on people that would already think that Jesus existed. and not so much that he's coming from a neutral position, but he is coming from a position where he automatically assumes that Jesus is historical, which I don't think that you can do that and still maintain objectivity. And that's really what I try to do whenever I'm looking into historical matters. So if you will, leave me comments down below with what you thought, and I hope that I will see you later. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice.